I reject you before the pack. Magnus's words echoed through the ceremonial circle like sharpened blades, cutting through the dense evening air. Hundreds of wolves watched in deathly silence as their alpha king shattered the heart of a fragile Omega trembling before him. Helga felt her knees buckle. Her hands instinctively protected her belly, where a secret life was growing, a secret she had come to share with him in this very moment. But Magnus gave her no chance to speak. You are weak, unremarkable, and unworthy of bearing my mark. Each word was poison, each syllable a death sentence for the bond that united them. Helga tried to speak, her voice barely a desperate whisper cutting through the silence. Magnus, please. I need to tell you something. But the Alpha King had already turned his back. Astrid, the cold blonde from the Northern Territory, emerged from the shadows and placed a possessive hand on his arm, a triumphant smile curving her cruel lips. Accept the rejection, Omega. Save yourself the humiliation of clinging to what was never truly yours. The bond snapped. Helga screamed, doubling over in pain as the connection between their souls shattered like glass. Blood trickled from her nose. No one moved to help her. No one dared defy the king's will. But what Magnus didn't know, what none of them could imagine, was that inside that broken Omega grew their future. A silver-eyed baby who would one day become legend. A white wolf who would save the life of the very king who rejected him. And when mother and son returned years later, nothing would ever be the same. This is the story of rejection, survival, and redemption. The story of Helga, the Omega who refused to stay broken. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from and how old you are. I hope you enjoy the story. The sun bled crimson across the horizon, casting long shadows over the sacred gathering grounds where the Silver Moon Pack assembled. The air hung thick with tension, electric and unforgiving, as hundreds of wolves formed a crescent around their Alpha King. The ancient stones that marked the ceremonial circle seemed to pulse with anticipation, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of pack gatherings, witnessing both joys and sorrows etched into their memory. Magnus stood at the center, his presence commanding despite the coldness that had settled into his storm-gray eyes. He was magnificent in his alpha regalia, the traditional ceremonial cloak draped across his broad shoulders, embroidered with silver threads that caught the dying light. His jaw was set, his shoulders squared, and in his hand he held the rejection that would shatter a heart already breaking. The scent of autumn leaves and approaching winter filled the air, mixing with the sharp tang of fear and anticipation that radiated from the assembled wolves. Helga stood before him, her hands trembling as they cradled the slight swell of her belly, barely noticeable beneath the simple white dress she had worn with such hope that morning. She was small even for an Omega, her frame delicate, and her auburn hair catching the dying light like autumn leaves before the fall, cascading down her back in waves she had carefully brushed, wanting to look beautiful for him. Her eyes, once bright with hope and love, now swam with unshed tears that threatened to spill at any moment. The pack watched in silence, their collective breath held, their wolves stirring uneasily beneath their skin. Some looked away, unable to witness what was about to unfold. Others stared with morbid fascination, their expressions ranging from pity to cruel satisfaction. I reject you before the pack, Magnus declared, his voice carrying across the gathering grounds with the weight of absolute authority. Each word was a knife, each syllable a wound. You are not fit to stand beside an Alpha King. You are weak, unremarkable, and unworthy of bearing my mark. The words hung in the air like poison. Helga's knees threatened to buckle, but she forced herself to remain standing. Her hand moved protectively over her stomach, over the life growing within her that Magnus didn't even know existed. She'd come here to tell him, to share the joy of their child, the product of what she had believed was their destined bond. Instead, she found only cruelty. Magnus, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind that had begun to stir through the trees. Please, I need to tell you something. There is nothing you could say that would matter to me." His eyes were ice, his expression carved from stone. "I have chosen another to stand at my side. Astrid of the Northern Territories will be my Luna. She is strong, powerful, everything you are not." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Astrid stepped forward from the shadows, her blonde hair gleaming like spun gold, her blue eyes cold and calculating. She was beautiful in the way of winter, all sharp edges and frozen beauty. She moved to Magnus's side, placing a possessive hand on his arm. "Accept the rejection, Omega," Astrid said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Save yourself the humiliation of clinging to what was never truly yours." Helga felt something break inside her chest, a shattering so complete that she wondered if she would ever be whole again. The bond between her and Magnus, the thread she had felt connecting their souls since the moment they met, began to fray and tear. The pain was exquisite, unbearable, a burning that consumed her from the inside out. "I accept," she whispered, and the words tasted like ash on her tongue. The bond snapped. Helga gasped, doubling over as the severing tore through her like wildfire. She felt Magnus's presence retreat from her mind, felt the warmth of their connection die and grow cold. When she straightened, blood trickled from her nose, and her legs finally gave way. She crumpled to the ground, her hand still protecting her unborn child. No one moved to help her. The pack watched in horrified silence as their Omega, rejected and broken, struggled to breathe through the pain. Magnus turned away, his jaw tight, refusing to look at what he had done. Astrid smiled, victorious. Helga pushed herself up, her movements slow and agonizing. She looked at Magnus one last time, memorizing the face of the man she had loved, the father of her child. His features were frozen in that mask of indifference, but for just a fraction of a second, she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or pain, before it was swallowed by resolve. Then she turned and walked away, each step taking her further from the only home she had ever known. Her bare feet left bloodstains on the stone path, a crimson trail marking her exodus. The sun finally disappeared beneath the horizon, and darkness fell over the silver moon pack like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. She walked through the night, guided only by instinct and the desperate need to protect the life within her. The forest closed around her like a dark embrace, branches catching at her hair and dress, thorns tearing at her skin. Her feet bled, her body ached, and her heart lay in ruins, but she kept moving. Every breath was agony, every step a battle against the exhaustion threatening to drag her down. The bond's severing had left her weak, disoriented, as if half of her soul had been ripped away. She stumbled over roots, fell to her knees more than once, but each time she forced herself up, thinking only of the child, of survival. She crossed territories, rivers, mountains, until she reached the edge of the wildlands, a place where rogues and outcasts found refuge. The trees here were older, wilder, their branches twisted into shapes that spoke of ancient magic and forgotten power. The air smelled different, less tame, carrying the scent of freedom and danger in equal measure. It was there, in a forgotten cabin deep in the ancient forest, that she finally collapsed, her strength completely spent, her body giving out on the wooden porch that creaked beneath her weight. An old healer named Mira found her 3 days later, half dead and delirious with fever. Mira was a rogue herself, cast out decades ago for refusing an unwanted bond. She recognized the signs of rejection immediately. The way Helga's wolf whimpered and cowered, the emptiness in her eyes that spoke of a soul torn in half. "You're with child," Mira said, her weathered hands gentle as they examined Helga. "Yes," Helga whispered. "That's why I have to survive." And survive she did. Through the long, brutal winter that followed, Helga clung to life with a determination born of maternal love. She endured the sickness, the pain, the nights when she screamed from nightmares of Magnus's cold eyes and colder words. Mira stayed by her side, teaching her to be strong, to live without the pack, to find worth in herself rather than in the bond that had been ripped away. Spring arrived with gentle rain and new growth, and with it came the birth. The cabin filled with the scent of herbs Mira had prepared, sage and lavender burning in clay pots to cleanse the air. Outside, the world was awakening. Flowers pushing through the last patches of snow, birds returning from their southern migrations, life renewing itself in countless small miracles. Helga labored for hours, her cries echoing through the cabin as Mira coached her through each contraction, her weathered hands steady and sure. The pain was immense, waves of agony that crashed over her like a violent sea, threatening to pull her under. But with each contraction, Helga thought of Magnus's rejection, of the strength it had taken to survive, and channeled that pain into power. She had endured the worst. She could endure this. The labor stretched from sunset through the deepest part of night, when the moon hung full and bright overhead, casting silver light through the cabin windows. Mira murmured encouragements, pressed cool cloths to Helga's forehead, held her hand through the worst of it. When the final push came, when she heard the first wail of her child, strong and clear and perfect, Helga wept with relief and joy, and a love so profound it nearly stopped her heart. The sound filled the cabin, filled her soul, chased away the last shadows of darkness that had clung to her since the rejection. "A boy," Mira announced, her voice thick with emotion, wrapping the infant in soft blankets she had woven herself during the long winter months. Strong and healthy, a fighter, just like his mother. Helga took her son into her arms and stared down at the tiny face, the perfect features, the shock of dark hair so like Magnus's. Her heart clenched at the resemblance, but then the baby opened his eyes, and all thoughts of his father fled. They were silver, bright and luminous, unlike anything she had ever seen, as if starlight itself had been captured and placed within them. And when he looked at her, truly looked at her with an awareness that seemed impossible for a newborn, she felt a power emanating from him that made her wolf bow in reverence. This was no ordinary child. This was something special, something destined for greatness. "Arvid," she whispered, the name coming to her like a gift from the moon itself. "Your name is Arvid, my little warrior." Years passed in the wildlands. Helga raised Arvid alone, though Mira remained close, a grandmother in all but blood. She taught him everything she knew, trained him to hunt and track, to survive and thrive. She told him stories of the packs, of tradition and honor, but she never told him about Magnus. That pain was hers to carry, a secret she kept locked away in the deepest chambers of her heart. Arvid grew quickly, stronger and faster than any child Helga had ever known. By the time he was 5, he could outrun full-grown wolves. By 7, he had shifted for the first time, and Helga had watched in awe as her son transformed into a massive white wolf, his fur gleaming like fresh snow under the moonlight. His size was impossible, his strength legendary even among the rogues who sometimes passed through their territory. "Mama," Arvid asked one evening as they sat by the fire, his silver eyes reflecting the flames. He was 10 now, tall and lean, with Magnus's strong features softened by Helga's gentle spirit. "Why don't we have a pack?" Helga's heart clenched. She had known this question would come eventually. "We have each other," she said softly. "That's enough." "But you're sad sometimes," Arvid persisted. He moved closer, laying his head on her shoulder the way he had as a small child. "I feel it. Your wolf is sad." She couldn't lie to him. "I loved someone once," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "He didn't love me back. It hurt very much. But then I had you, and you healed me in ways I didn't know were possible." Arvid was quiet for a long moment. "If he didn't love you, Then he was a fool, he finally said, his voice fierce with childish loyalty. You're the best mama in the whole world. Helga pulled him close, breathing in his scent of pine and snow. And you're the best son, she whispered against his hair. My miracle, my light in the darkness. But darkness was gathering in the territories beyond the wildlands. Word reached them through traveling rogues of escalating tensions, of old rivalries reigniting. The Silver Moon Pack, under Magnus's leadership, had grown powerful and prosperous, but with power came enemies. The Shadow Fang clan, a brutal coalition of rogue packs from the eastern territories, had declared war. They wanted Magnus's lands, his resources, and his blood. Helga heard the news with a mixture of emotions she couldn't untangle. Part of her still ached at the sound of Magnus's name, the old wound never fully healed despite the years. Another part felt nothing but contempt for the man who had rejected her so cruelly. But beneath it all, buried deep, was a flicker of concern. Whatever he had done, Magnus had once been her mate, and some bonds, even broken ones, left marks that never fully faded. The Silver Moon Pack is your father's pack, isn't it? Mira asked one day as they worked in the garden. Arvid was 13 now, training in the forest, his howls echoing through the trees. Helga's hands stilled in the soil. She had never confirmed it, but Mira had always been perceptive. Yes, she admitted quietly. Does Arvid know? No, and he never will. Helga's voice was firm. Magnus made his choice. We are not his concern, and he is not ours. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The attack came without warning on an autumn evening, much like the one when Helga had been rejected, as if fate itself was drawing circles, bringing them back to where it all began. Arvid, now 15 and nearly full-grown, his body lean and muscular from years of training in the harsh wildlands, was hunting deep in the forest when he heard the sounds of battle carried on the wind. Snarls and screams, the clash of wolves in mortal combat, the smell of blood thick enough to taste, metallic and sharp, mixed with fear and fury. His wolf rose immediately, powerful and protective, urging him toward the conflict with an instinct that went beyond conscious thought. He ran, faster than thought, his white form blurring through the trees like a ghost, like moonlight given shape and purpose. His paws barely touched the ground, his muscles working in perfect harmony, every sense heightened and focused. He crested a ridge and looked down into a valley where chaos reigned. Two forces clashed in savage fury, wolves of every color tearing at each other with fang and claw, the ground already churned to mud with blood and rain. The sounds were overwhelming, growls and whimpers, the snap of breaking bones, the wet tear of flesh, the desperate howls of the dying. But it was the massive black wolf at the center of the battle that drew Arvid's attention like a lodestone. The wolf fought with desperate strength against a dozen enemies, his fur matted with blood, both his own and his enemies', his movements growing slower, more labored. Even from this distance, Arvid could see the exhaustion setting in, could smell the blood loss weakening him. The black wolf was magnificent, powerful, clearly an alpha of great strength, but he was losing. In minutes, perhaps seconds, he would fall. Arvid didn't think. He simply acted, some deep instinct overriding all rational thought. He launched himself down the slope, a white streak of fury, and crashed into the fray with the force of an avalanche. His size alone made wolves scatter in terror, his power undeniable, his presence commanding. The ground shook beneath his paws as he landed, and the nearest enemy wolves yelped and fled before he even touched them. He fought with instinct born of years in the wildlands, where survival meant victory and defeat meant death, where Mira had taught him that mercy was a luxury, and hesitation meant dying. He tore through the Shadowfang wolves like they were made of paper, his jaws crushing bone with sickening crunches, his claws rending flesh with surgical precision, moving with a grace and lethality that seemed impossible for one so young. The black wolf staggered, falling to his knees. An enormous gray wolf, the leader of the Shadowfang clan, lunged for the killing blow. Arvid intercepted him mid-leap, catching the gray wolf by the throat and slamming him into the ground with enough force to crack stone. He stood over the fallen enemy, his silver eyes blazing, and released a howl that shook the very earth. It was a howl of dominance, of absolute authority, and every wolf on that battlefield felt it resonate in their bones. The Shadowfang clan broke and fled, their leader dead, their courage shattered by the appearance of the legendary white wolf. Arvid turned to the black wolf, who had shifted back to human form. The man was older, perhaps in his mid-30s, with dark hair streaked with silver at the temples and storm-gray eyes that widened in shock. He was covered in wounds, his breathing labored, but he was alive. "Who are you?" the man gasped, his voice rough with pain and awe. Arvid shifted as well, standing tall and proud despite his youth. "I am Arvid," he said simply. "And you were losing." Magnus stared at the boy, at the silver eyes and the powerful presence, at the strength that radiated from him like heat from a flame. Something stirred in his memory, something he had buried and tried to forget. "Arvid," he repeated slowly. "That's a strong name." "My mother gave it to me," Arvid said, a note of fierce pride in his voice. "She said it means eagle tree, a warrior who stands tall." Magnus felt something crack in his chest. The boy's features, now that he looked closely, were hauntingly familiar. The shape of his jaw, the set of his eyes, even the way he held himself. "Your mother," Magnus said, his voice barely steady. "What is her name?" Arvid hesitated, some instinct warning him. But the man before him was clearly a great alpha, wounded and in need. "Helga," he finally answered. The name hit Magnus like a physical blow. The world seemed to tilt and spin, all the air leaving his lungs in a rush. Helga, the Omega he had rejected 5 years ago. The woman he had forced himself to forget, whose face still haunted his dreams, whose absence left a hollow place in his chest he refused to acknowledge. "No," Magnus whispered. But even as he denied it, he knew it was true. This boy, this impossibly strong and noble boy, was his son. The child Helga must have been carrying that day. The secret she had tried to tell him before he silenced her with rejection and cruelty. Arvid frowned, seeing the color drain from the man's face. "You're injured. I should take you to a healer." "Wait," Magnus managed, reaching out with a bloodied hand. "Your mother. Where is she? Is she well?" "She's fine," Arvid said, his tone growing suspicious. "She's safe in the wildlands. Why do you ask?" Magnus closed his eyes, shame and regret washing over him in waves. "Because I knew her once," he said, his voice breaking. "And I wronged her terribly." Before Arvid could respond, the sounds of approaching wolves reached their ears. Magnus's pack, come to find their alpha. They burst into the clearing, dozens of them, and stopped short at the sight of the massive white wolf boy standing over their fallen king. "Stand down," Magnus commanded, his voice weak but authoritative. "This boy saved my life. He is a hero, not an enemy." The pack obeyed, though their eyes remained wary. Magnus's beta, a scarred man named Rowan, pushed forward. "Alpha, you're hurt. We need to get you home." "Yes," Magnus agreed, but his eyes never left Arvid. "And we need to send word. I need to find someone I lost." Arvid watched as they helped Magnus to his feet, as they prepared to carry him away. Something in the man's gray eyes called to him, a recognition that felt like destiny and doom all at once. "What will you tell this person you lost?" Arvid asked quietly. Magnus looked at him, and in that moment, Arvid saw everything: the regret, the longing, the shame, and the desperate hope. "That I'm sorry," Magnus whispered, "that I was a fool, and that I want a chance, however small, to make things right." Arvid felt his world shift and tilt. He thought of his mother, of the sadness that sometimes dimmed her eyes, of the way she never spoke of his father. "If you wronged someone my mother knew," he said carefully, "then you should know that forgiveness is not guaranteed. Some wounds cut too deep." "I know," Magnus said, "but I have to try." They carried Magnus away, back toward the Silver Moon territory. Arvid stood alone in the valley, surrounded by the dead, his mind reeling. He knew, deep in his bones, who Magnus was. The pieces fit too perfectly, the recognition too strong. This was his father, the man who had rejected his mother and broken her heart. When Arvid returned to the cabin, the sun was rising. Helga was waiting on the porch, her face tight with worry. She had felt her son's distress through their bond, had sensed the turmoil in his heart. "What happened?" she asked, rushing to meet him. Arvid looked at his mother, at the woman who had sacrificed everything for him, who had loved him unconditionally despite the pain she carried. "I saved someone today," he said slowly. "A warrior, an alpha." Helga's expression softened. "You have a good heart, my son." "His name was Magnus," Arvid continued, watching her carefully. Helga froze. All the color drained from her face, and her hands began to tremble. "What did you say?" "Magnus. That was his name." Arvid moved closer, taking her hands in his. "He's my father, isn't he? The one who hurt you?" Helga couldn't speak. She could only nod, tears spilling down her cheeks. Arvid pulled her into his arms, holding her as she shook. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know until it was too late. I saved his life." "You did the right thing," Helga managed, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Life is sacred, no matter who it belongs to. I taught you that." "He wants to find you," Arvid said. "He said he wronged you. He wants to apologize." Helga pulled back, wiping her tears with shaking hands. "No," she said firmly. "I don't want to see him. What we had is long dead, Arvid. He made that clear 5 years ago." But even as she spoke, Helga felt her wolf stir for the first time in years, a whisper of something she thought had died. The bond was broken, severed completely, but some echo remained, some shadow of what they had been. 3 days later, a delegation arrived at the edge of the wildlands. Magnus himself led them, still bandaged but insistent on coming. Rowan and a dozen warriors accompanied him, their expressions wary. They had heard the stories of the rogues who lived here, the outcasts and the dangerous. Mira met them at the border, her old eyes sharp and knowing. "Alpha King Magnus," she said, her voice dry. "You are far from your comfortable throne." "I seek Helga," Magnus said without preamble. "I know she's here. Please, I need to speak with her." Mira studied him for a long moment. "She doesn't want to see you." "I know." Magnus's voice was raw. "But I saved her life once, long ago, before I became king. I pulled her from a river when we were children. She owes me nothing, but I'm asking anyway. Please." The old healer sighed. She remembered that story. Helga had told it once, in the depths of winter, when she was delirious with fever. How a young Magnus had risked his life to save a drowning Omega girl. How she had loved him from that moment forward. "Wait here," Mira said finally. She found Helga in the garden, her hands in the soil, seeking peace in the earth. "He's here," Mira said gently. Helga didn't look up. "I know, I felt him. Will you see him?" "I don't know if I can." Helga's voice was small, vulnerable. "What if it breaks me all over again?" "Then I will be there to put you back together," Mira said, "as I was before. But Helga, my dear, you cannot heal if you keep the wound closed. Sometimes we must open it, clean it, Let it bleed before it can truly mend. Helga closed her eyes, breathing deeply. Then she stood, brushing the dirt from her hands, and nodded. Tell him I'll meet him by the river. Alone. At sunset. The river ran clear and cold through the heart of the wildlands, its banks lined with silver birch trees that whispered secrets to the wind. Helga arrived first, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She wore a simple dress, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders, and she looked like something from a fairy tale, ethereal and untouchable. Magnus arrived as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. He stopped when he saw her, his breath catching at the sight. She was more beautiful than he remembered, despite the hardship written in the lines around her eyes, the wariness in her posture. Helga, he said, and her name on his lips was a prayer and a plea. She turned to face him, and the impact of seeing him again nearly drove her to her knees. 5 years had been kind to Magnus. He was broader, more heavily muscled, his face carved with the weight of leadership. But it was his eyes that captured her, those storm-gray eyes that had once looked at her with love and then with cruelty. You should not have come, Helga said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. I know. Magnus took a step closer, then another, until only a few feet separated them. But I had to. Helga, I've thought about that day every single day since it happened. What I said, what I did, it haunts me. Good, Helga said coldly. It should. Magnus flinched but didn't retreat. You're right to hate me. I deserve every ounce of your rage. But please, let me explain. Explain what? Helga's voice rose, years of pain breaking through her composure. How you destroyed me in front of the entire pack. How you called me weak and unworthy. How you rejected our bond without even letting me speak. I was trying to tell you I was pregnant. The words burst from her like a dam breaking. I came to tell you about our child, and you didn't even give me the chance. You just threw me away like I meant nothing. Magnus's face crumpled. He dropped to his knees before her, his head bowed. I know, he said, his voice breaking. Arvid told me. When I saw him, when I realized who he was, it killed me. Helga, I am so sorry, so desperately sorry. Sorry doesn't change anything, Helga said, but her voice shook. Sorry doesn't give me back the years I spent broken. Sorry doesn't erase the humiliation, the pain, the nights I wanted to die because living hurt too much. You're right. Magnus looked up at her, tears streaming down his face unashamedly. Nothing I say will ever be enough. But I need you to know why. Why I did it. Helga wanted to refuse, to turn and walk away, but something in his eyes held her. Then tell me, she said. Make me understand. Magnus took a shuddering breath. My father was dying. He had weeks left, maybe days. And before he died, he made me promise that I would take a strong Luna, someone who could unite the territories, bring peace to the warring packs. Astrid's clan controlled the northern passes. Without them, we would have been vulnerable to attack. So you sacrificed me for politics, Helga said bitterly. Yes, Magnus admitted, and it was the worst mistake of my life. I thought I was being strong, putting duty before love, but I was just a coward. I couldn't face my father, couldn't tell him that you were my choice, that I loved you more than power or peace or anything else in this world. He rose to his feet, standing before her with his heart laid bare. Astrid and I were never truly bonded. The ceremony was political, cold. She rules beside me, but she doesn't share my bed, doesn't hold my heart. That belongs to you, Helga. It always has, even after I destroyed our bond. Helga shook her head, backing away. You can't do this. You can't come here after 5 years and expect me to just forgive you because you were scared. I needed you, Magnus. I needed you, and you chose pride over love. I know. Magnus's voice was raw. And I will spend the rest of my life regretting it. But Helga, our son saved my life. That beautiful, powerful, incredible boy that you raised alone, he's the reason I'm standing here. And when I looked into his eyes, I saw you. I saw everything I lost, everything I threw away. Arvid is mine, Helga said fiercely. You have no claim to him. I'm not asking for a claim, Magnus said. I'm asking for a chance to know him, to be part of his life if he'll allow it, a chance to prove to you that I'm not the same coward who hurt you. I've changed, Helga. The years have taught me the value of what I lost. Helga turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. The sun was setting now, the light dying, and she felt as lost as she had that night 5 years ago. But this time, she wasn't broken. This time, she had survived and become stronger. I need time, she finally said. I can't just forgive you because you ask. You broke something in me, Magnus. It took years to heal, and even now, there are cracks. Take all the time you need, Magnus said. I'll wait. Days, months, years. I'll wait however long it takes. Helga looked back at him, at the man she had loved so desperately, and felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the possibility of it. Go home, Magnus, she said softly. Give me space to think. Magnus nodded, his expression both hopeful and heartbroken. He turned to leave, then paused. Thank you, he said, for raising Arvid to be the kind of man who saves even those who don't deserve it. He's extraordinary, Helga. You did that. You made a miracle. He walked away into the gathering darkness, and Helga stood alone by the river, watching the water flow past. She touched her chest, where the bond had once lived, and felt the echo of something long dead beginning to stir. Not love, not yet, but perhaps the memory of it. Arvid found her there an hour later, sitting on the riverbank with her knees drawn up to her chest. He sat beside her without speaking, offering the comfort of his presence. Did you see him? He finally asked. Yes, Helga said quietly. And I don't know. She leaned her head on her son's shoulder, drawing strength from him. He says he's sorry. He says he's changed. But words are easy, Arvid. Actions are what matter. What does your heart say? Arvid asked. Helga was quiet for a long moment. My heart is confused, she admitted. Part of me wants to hate him forever for what he did, but another part, a part I thought was dead, remembers loving him. Remembers the boy who saved me from drowning, who laughed with me under the stars, who made me believe in destined mates. Do you want to try again? Arvid asked carefully. With him? I don't know if I can, Helga whispered. What if he hurts me again? Arvid took his mother's hand, his silver eyes serious. Then I will be here to help you heal, just like you were there for me every day of my life. You taught me to be brave, Mama. Maybe it's time for you to be brave too. The next weeks were strange and tentative. Magnus sent gifts, not expensive or elaborate, but thoughtful. A book of poetry he remembered Helga loving. Seeds for rare flowers. A blanket woven by the finest weavers in his pack. Each gift came with a note, simple and sincere. I remember you loved stargazing. I hope these books bring you joy. You always wanted a garden. May these flowers bloom as beautifully as your spirit. The nights are growing cold. Please stay warm. Helga received each gift with confusion and something that might have been cautious hope. She didn't respond, but she didn't return them either. She kept the books on her nightstand, planted the seeds in her garden, wrapped herself in the blanket on chilly evenings. Arvid, meanwhile, received an invitation to visit the Silver Moon Pack. Magnus wanted to thank him properly for saving his life, to honor him before the pack. Arvid looked to his mother for guidance. "Go," Helga said, though her heart clenched with worry. "It's time you saw where you came from. Just remember, you don't owe him anything. You are your own man, Arvid. His blood runs in your veins, but his choices don't define you." Arvid traveled to the Silver Moon territory with Mira as his escort, the old healer insisting she wouldn't let him face that den of politics alone. They arrived at sunset, the timing eerily familiar, and were greeted with ceremony and respect. The pack that had once watched Helga's humiliation now bowed before her son, honoring him as the warrior who had saved their Alpha King. Magnus stood at the center of it all, his expression complex as he watched Arvid approach. The boy, nearly a man, walked with confidence and grace, his silver eyes taking in everything. When he reached Magnus, he didn't bow. He stood tall and proud, meeting the Alpha King's gaze as an equal. "You honor me with your presence," Magnus said formally. "The Silver Moon Pack owes you a debt we can never fully repay." "I didn't save you for a debt," Arvid replied, his voice clear and strong. "I saved you because it was right." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This boy, this outsider, spoke to their alpha without fear or deference. Magnus smiled, pride shining in his eyes. "You have your mother's courage," he said softly. "And your strength," Arvid acknowledged, "though I like to think I use mine more wisely." The barb struck home. Magnus nodded, accepting the criticism without defense. "You're right," he said, "and I hope to learn from your example." The feast that followed was grand, but Arvid found himself uncomfortable with the attention. He sat at Magnus's right hand, a position of honor, and fielded questions from curious pack members. They wanted to know about the wildlands, about his training, about the legendary White Wolf that had decimated the Shadowfang clan. But it was Astrid's appearance that changed the evening. The Luna of the Silver Moon Pack entered the great hall like winter itself, her blonde hair piled high, her dress regal and severe. She looked at Arvid with barely concealed contempt, then turned to Magnus. "This is the boy?" she asked coldly. "The rogue who thinks himself a hero?" "This is Arvid," Magnus said, his voice tight with warning, "and you will show him respect." Astrid laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Respect? For a bastard born of an Omega who couldn't even hold on to her mate." The hall fell silent. Arvid rose slowly, his presence expanding, his power filling the room like a rising tide. "Be careful how you speak of my mother," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "She is worth 1,000 of you." "You dare threaten me?" Astrid's eyes flashed. "I am Luna of this pack." "You are a politician wearing a crown," Arvid said. "My mother is a survivor who built a life from ashes. There is no comparison." Magnus stood, placing himself between them. "Enough," he said, his alpha command rolling through the hall. "Astrid, retire. Now." "You would dismiss me for this whelp?" Astrid demanded. "I would dismiss you for disrespecting a guest," Magnus said, "and for speaking ill of someone who deserves only honor. Leave, before I say things that cannot be unsaid." Astrid's face twisted with rage, but she obeyed, sweeping from the hall with her entourage following. Magnus turned to Arvid, apology written in every line of his face. "I'm sorry," he said. "That was unacceptable." "Is that what my mother faced?" Arvid asked quietly. "People like her?" Magnus's silence was answer enough. Arvid shook his head, disgust clear on his face. "I've seen enough," he said. "Thank you for the feast, but I think it's time I returned home. He started to walk away, but Magnus caught his arm. Wait, he said. Please. I know this place must seem cold and political to you, but it's not all like Astrid. There are good people here. People who would have defended your mother if I hadn't been too blinded by duty to see what mattered. Do you love her? Arvid asked suddenly. My mother. Did you ever truly love her? Or was she just convenient until something better came along? Magnus looked into his son's eyes, those silver eyes so unlike his own, and felt his heart break all over again. I loved her more than life itself, he said, his voice raw with emotion. I still do. Every day without her is a day spent in shadow. But I was young and stupid and scared, and I let fear convince me that duty mattered more than love. I will regret that choice until the day I die. Arvid studied his father's face, searching for deception and finding only truth. Then prove it, he said. Not with words or gifts or grand gestures. Prove it by changing, by being the man she deserved 5 years ago. He pulled his arm free and walked away, leaving Magnus standing alone in the hall, surrounded by his pack, but feeling more isolated than ever. Rowan approached, concern etched on his scarred face. That went well, the beta said dryly. Magnus laughed, the sound bitter. He's right to hate me. They both are. I have to fix this, Rowan. I don't care what it takes. Some things can't be fixed, Rowan said gently. Sometimes you just have to build something new from the pieces. Magnus nodded slowly, an idea forming. Then that's what I'll do. Over the following months, Magnus began to change things. He started with Astrid, dissolving their political marriage and sending her back to the Northern Territories with honor, but without regret. The pack was shocked. The elders protested, but Magnus stood firm. He would not live a lie anymore. I broke a bond 5 years ago, he announced to his council. I threw away my true mate for the sake of political alliance. I will not compound that mistake by continuing to pretend. Astrid deserves a chance at real happiness, and so do I. The dissolution was messy but final. Astrid left with bitterness in her heart, but also with relief. Their arrangement had been cold and loveless for both of them. Without her, Magnus felt as though he could finally breathe. He sent word to Helga, not asking for anything, simply informing her of what he had done. He didn't expect a response, but he wanted her to know that he was serious, that he was willing to dismantle his carefully constructed life if it meant a chance at building something real. Helga read his letter in the garden, surrounded by the flowers that had grown from the seeds he sent. She felt something loosening in her chest, some of the old bitterness giving way to cautious hope. He was trying, truly trying, in ways that went beyond words. He ended his marriage, she told Mira that evening. The old healer smiled knowingly. And what will you do with that information? I don't know, Helga admitted. Part of me wants to run to him. Part of me wants to make him suffer longer. And part of me is just scared, Mira. What if I let him in and he breaks me again? Then you'll survive, Mira said simply, as you did before. But Helga, my dear, you cannot protect yourself from hurt by refusing to live. Sometimes the greatest courage is in letting yourself be vulnerable again. Winter came to the wildlands, harsh and unforgiving, bringing snow that piled high against the cabin walls and winds that howled through the trees like restless spirits. Helga spent her days tending to the cabin, teaching the young rogues who sought her out for wisdom, sharing the lessons she had learned through survival and loss, and thinking, always thinking, about Magnus, about their past, about the possibility of a future. The gifts he sent kept coming, books of poetry with passages marked, as if he had read them thinking of her, seeds for flowers she had mentioned loving years ago. Blankets woven in colors he remembered were her favorites. Each gift was accompanied by letters, not begging or demanding, but simply sharing his days, his thoughts, his slow transformation. It was on the longest night of winter, when darkness claimed the world for hours and hours, when the cold was so intense that breath froze in the air, that everything changed. A howl echoed through the forest, urgent and desperate, cutting through the wind like a knife. Helga recognized it immediately as belonging to one of Magnus's pack scouts, the particular timbre marking him as Silver Moon. She threw on her cloak, wrapped herself in furs against the biting cold, and ran into the snow, her wolf lending her speed even in human form, her feet finding purchase on the icy ground with practiced ease. She found the scout collapsed at the edge of her territory, bloodied and barely conscious, his human form crumpled in the snow that was already turning red beneath him. His breathing was shallow, rapid, his eyes glazed with pain and shock. "Attack!" he gasped, his voice barely audible above the wind that tore at them both. "The Shadow Fang clan has returned. Thousands of them. More than we've ever seen. They're overwhelming us. The Alpha King needs help. He's going to die if no one comes." Helga's blood ran cold, her heart seizing in her chest. She looked toward the Silver Moon territory, miles away through treacherous winter terrain, through forests thick with snow and ice, through darkness and danger. She could stay here, safe and removed, warm in her cabin with Mira's tea and the fire crackling. Magnus was not her mate, not her problem. He had made that clear 5 years ago when he rejected her before the pack, when he chose duty over love, politics over truth. But then she thought of Arvid, of the goodness in his heart that came from her teachings, from the values she had instilled in him. She thought of the man Magnus claimed to be becoming, of the letters and gifts, of the dissolution of his marriage, of the risks he had taken to prove himself changed. And she thought of the girl she had once been, who believed in honor and courage, and doing what was right even when it was hard, even when it hurt. "Get him inside," she ordered Mira. Then she lifted her head and howled, a summoning call that echoed through the wildlands. Rogues emerged from the shadows, drawn by her voice, over 100 strong. They were outcasts and wanderers, but they were also survivors and fighters. "The Silver Moon Pack is under attack," Helga said, her voice carrying to every wolf assembled. "They need our help. I'm not asking anyone to come with me. This is not your fight, but I'm going, and if any of you want to stand with me, I would be honored." Every single rogue stepped forward. They had found refuge in the wildlands, had been treated with respect and kindness by Helga and Mira. They would follow her into hell itself if she asked. Arvid materialized from the trees, already shifted into his massive white form. He padded to his mother's side, his silver eyes gleaming with determination. Helga shifted as well, her smaller red-brown wolf looking fragile next to her son. But when she howled again, there was nothing fragile about the sound. It was the cry of a mother protecting her family, an Omega who had found her strength in survival. They ran through the night, a wave of rogues flowing through the forest like water. The snow fell heavy and thick, but they didn't slow. Helga pushed herself harder than ever before, her lungs burning, her paws bleeding, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. They arrived at dawn to find carnage. The Silver Moon Pack was fighting valiantly but losing ground. The Shadow Fang clan had brought reinforcements, more wolves than anyone had anticipated. Magnus fought at the center of it all, his black wolf massive and furious, but even he was tiring under the onslaught. Helga didn't hesitate. She charged into the battle with her rogues behind her, 100 fresh fighters turning the tide. Arvid was a force of nature, tearing through enemies like they were nothing. But it was Helga that Magnus noticed, even in the chaos of battle. He saw her red-brown form, saw her fighting with savage determination, and felt his heart stop. She had come. After everything, she had come. The battle raged for hours. Bodies fell on both sides, blood staining the snow red. But slowly, inevitably, the Shadow Fang clan began to retreat. They hadn't counted on the rogues, hadn't expected the legendary White Wolf and his fierce mother. When the last enemy fled, when silence finally fell over the battlefield, Magnus shifted back to human form. He was covered in wounds, swaying on his feet, but he searched the carnage with desperate eyes. "Helga," he called, his voice hoarse. "Helga." She emerged from the trees, shifted back, her simple dress torn and bloodied. They stared at each other across the field of fallen warriors, and the world seemed to stop spinning. Magnus started toward her, stumbling, and Helga ran. She ran to him, closing the distance, and caught him as his legs finally gave out. "You came," Magnus whispered, his hands coming up to cup her face like she was something precious and fragile. "You saved us." "I couldn't let you die," Helga said, tears streaming down her face. "Despite everything, I couldn't let you die." Magnus pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, breathing in her scent like it was air itself. "I love you," he said, the words broken and desperate. "I never stopped. I never will. Helga, I love you. And I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm begging you. Please, let me spend the rest of my life proving that I've changed." Helga pulled back, looking into his gray eyes, those eyes that had once rejected her so cruelly. But now they held only love, raw and honest and real. "You broke me," she whispered. "You shattered my heart into so many pieces I didn't think I could put them back together." "I know," Magnus said, "and I will never forgive myself. But I survived," Helga continued, her voice growing stronger. "I built a life. I raised our son to be good and strong and brave. And I learned that I don't need you to be whole, Magnus. I'm already whole. The question is whether I want you anyway." Magnus waited, barely breathing, his entire world balanced on her answer. Helga touched his face, her fingers gentle on his bloodied skin. "I want to try," she said finally. "Not because I need you, but because I choose you. But Magnus, if you ever hurt me like that again, there will be no third chance. I will walk away and never look back." "I swear," Magnus said, his voice fierce with conviction. "On my life, on my crown, on everything I hold sacred, I will never hurt you again. You are my mate, Helga, my true mate. And I will spend every day proving that I'm worthy of that bond." He kissed her then, desperate and tender, tasting her tears and his own. Around them, the pack watched in stunned silence. Their Alpha King, kissing an Omega, covered in blood and battle, looking at her like she was his salvation. Arvid approached slowly, his silver eyes moving between his mother and father. Magnus looked up, releasing Helga reluctantly. "Arvid," he said, his voice rough, "I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I want to be your father if you'll allow it. I want to know you, to be part of your life." Arvid was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at his mother, saw the hope in her eyes, and made his decision. "You saved my mother's life once, when you were young," he said. "Today, she saved yours. Perhaps that makes you even. What happens next is up to both of you. But if you hurt her again, Alpha King or not, I will tear you apart." Magnus smiled, pride and love shining in his eyes. "I would expect nothing less," he said. "You're a better man than I was at your age, than I was even 5 years ago. It's an honor to call you my son." The words hung in the air, tentative and hopeful. Arvid didn't respond immediately, but he didn't walk away either. It was a beginning, fragile and uncertain, but a beginning nonetheless. The months that followed were not easy. Helga moved to the Silver Moon territory, but kept her cabin in the wild lands as a refuge. Magnus courted her the way he should have from the beginning, with patience and respect. He learned her rhythms, her likes and dislikes, the way she took her tea, and the songs that made her smile. They walked together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. Magnus told her about his father's death, about the pressure he had felt to be perfect, to be strong. Helga told him about the years alone, about the nights she had screamed into her pillow, about the slow, painful process of learning to love herself again. "I hated you," she admitted one night as they sat by a fire. "For so long I hated you, but I also missed you. It was the worst kind of torment." "I hated myself," Magnus said quietly. "Every time I closed my eyes, I saw your face that day. The way you looked at me, like I was destroying you. Because I was. I was destroying the best thing in my life, and I knew it. But I was too much of a coward to stop." "You're not a coward anymore," Helga said, taking his hand. A coward wouldn't have dissolved his political marriage, wouldn't have fought to win back something he threw away. "You've changed, Magnus. I see it." "Because of you," Magnus said, bringing her hand to his lips. "Because losing you taught me what truly matters, and having this second chance, it's more than I deserve." "Then don't waste it," Helga said, her eyes intense. "Make it count." Magnus proposed on the anniversary of their first meeting, the day he had pulled her from the river as children. He took her back to that place, where the water ran clear and the memories lived. He knelt before her, not as an alpha king, but as a man who had learned the value of humility. "I can't give you back the years I stole," he said. "I can't erase the pain I caused, but I can give you the rest of my life, if you'll have it. Marry me, Helga. Be my Luna, my mate, my partner in all things. Let me love you the way you deserve, the way I should have from the beginning." Helga looked down at him, at this powerful man kneeling in the dirt, offering her everything. She thought about the girl she had been, broken and rejected. She thought about the woman she had become, strong and whole. And she thought about the future, uncertain but full of possibility. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet. "Yes, I'll marry you. But Magnus, we're doing this as equals. I won't be a decoration on your arm or a political piece. I'm your partner, in everything, or I'm nothing." "Partners," Magnus agreed, pulling her close. "In everything. Always." The bonding ceremony took place under a full moon, with both packs in attendance. The rogues from the wildlands stood beside the warriors of Silver Moon, united for this moment. Helga wore a dress the color of starlight, her auburn hair crowned with flowers. Magnus wore traditional ceremonial robes, but his eyes only for his bride. But it was Arvid who performed the ceremony, having been granted the honor by both his parents. He stood before them, tall and proud, his silver eyes bright with emotion. 5 years ago, a bond was broken in cruelty and fear, he said, his voice carrying to every wolf assembled. Today, we forge a new bond, built not on destiny or obligation, but on choice. On love freely given and forgiveness hard won. Today, we witness not just a union, but a healing. He bound their wrists with silver cord, the traditional symbol. Helga, daughter of the wildlands, survivor and mother, do you choose Magnus as your mate, your partner, your equal? I do, Helga said, her voice steady and sure. Magnus, Alpha King of Silver Moon, leader and protector. Do you choose Helga as your mate, your partner, your equal? With everything I am, Magnus said, now and always. Then by the light of the moon and the witness of these pacts, I declare you bonded. Let no one tear asunder what has been forged in fire and redeemed through love. Magnus kissed Helga as the pacts howled their approval, and this time when they bonded, it was right, it was whole. The connection flared to life between them, brilliant and unbreakable, and Helga gasped at the intensity of it. She felt Magnus's love flooding through the bond, his regret and his hope, his devotion and his promise. And she sent her own feelings back, her forgiveness and her love, her trust and her future. They were one, truly one, and this time, nothing would break them. The celebration lasted 3 days. Helga was crowned Luna of the Silver Moon Pack, but she remained connected to the wildlands, building a bridge between the pack and the rogues. She brought wisdom and compassion to Magnus's rule, tempering his strength with mercy. Arvid remained in the wildlands, preferring the freedom to the politics of pack life. But he visited often, and slowly, tentatively, he built a relationship with Magnus. They trained together, fought together, and over time, the wariness faded into respect, and then into love. Magnus learned to be a father, not through authority, but through presence, through showing up, day after day, proving himself worthy of the title. 5 years to the day after Magnus had rejected Helga, they stood together on the same gathering grounds, where it had all begun. The sun was setting, painting the sky in familiar shades of crimson and gold. The pack assembled, not to witness a rejection, but to witness a triumph. 5 years ago, I stood here and made the worst mistake of my life, Magnus said, his arm around Helga's waist. I rejected my true mate out of fear and misguided duty. I hurt the woman I loved, and I threw away a future I didn't know I was losing. He looked at Helga, his eyes soft with love. But she survived. She took the broken pieces of her life and built something beautiful. She raised our son to be extraordinary. And then, through grace I don't deserve, she gave me a second chance. Helga stepped forward, addressing the pack directly. I want every Omega here to hear this, she said, her voice strong. Your worth is not determined by your rank or your mate or your pack's opinion of you. You are valuable, powerful, and worthy of respect simply because you exist. Never let anyone, not even an Alpha King, convince you otherwise. The Omegas in the crowd stood taller, their eyes bright with tears and pride. Helga had become their champion, their proof that survival was possible, that strength came in many forms. And to those who lead, Helga continued, looking at Magnus with love and challenge in equal measure, remember that power without compassion is tyranny, that duty without heart is empty. Lead with strength, yes, but also with kindness, with humility, with the understanding that every wolf in your pack, from the strongest warrior to the smallest Omega, deserves your respect and protection. The pack erupted in howls of approval. Magnus pulled Helga close, pressing a kiss to her temple. You're magnificent, he whispered. Have I told you that today? Only twice, Helga said, smiling. But I'll allow a third. As the sun finally set and the moon rose to take its place, Helga looked out over the pack and felt peace settle into her bones. The wound had healed, leaving scars but also wisdom. She had learned that love wasn't about destiny or bonds or fate. It was about choice, about choosing every day to forgive, to trust, to be vulnerable. Arvid joined them, his white form gleaming under the moonlight. He shifted, standing beside his parents, his hand on his mother's shoulder. Are you happy? He asked her quietly. Helga looked at her son, her miracle, the light that had guided her through the darkest years. Then she looked at Magnus, at the man who had broken her, and then spent years earning her trust back. Yes, she said, and it was the truth. I'm happy. Not because I have a mate or a crown or a pack, but because I have myself. And that's enough. Everything else is just a gift. Magnus took her hand, lacing their fingers together. No, he said softly. You're the gift, and I'll spend the rest of my life being worthy of it. The moon shone down on them, on the Alpha King and his Luna, on the White Wolf Prince, on the pack that had witnessed both destruction and redemption. And in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The broken had been made whole, the rejected had been chosen, and love, patient and enduring, had won. Years later, when historians wrote about the reign of Magnus and Helga, they called it the Golden Age, a time when strength and compassion ruled in equal measure, when rogues were welcomed and omegas were honored, when a white wolf prince walked between worlds, bringing wisdom from the wildlands to the packlands. But those who had been there, who had witnessed the journey, knew the truth. It wasn't a perfect story or an easy one. It was messy and painful and full of mistakes. But it was real, and it was theirs. Helga would sometimes return to the cabin in the wildlands, spending quiet days with Mira, tending her garden, remembering the woman she had been. The scars never fully faded. The memories never completely lost their sting. But she carried them with pride now, proof of her survival, testament to her strength. And when the nightmares came, when she woke gasping with the phantom pain of that rejection burning through her, Magnus was there. He held her through the dark hours, whispering apologies and promises, proving again and again that he had changed, that he was staying, that he would never leave her broken and alone. "I love you," he would say, the words a prayer and a promise. "I love you, and I'm here, and I'm never letting go." And Helga, wrapped in his arms, safe and chosen and loved, would believe him. Because love, she had learned, wasn't about being perfect. It was about being present, about choosing each other, day after day, through the good and the bad and everything in between. She had been rejected before the pack, broken and cast aside, but she had returned, not as a victim, but as a survivor. Not as a weak omega, but as a queen. She had raised the heir who saved the Alpha King's life, had rebuilt herself from ashes, had learned to forgive without forgetting. And in the end, that was the greatest triumph of all. Not that she had been chosen, but that she had chosen herself first. And everything else had followed from that one crucial act of self-love and survival. The story of Helga and Magnus became legend, passed down through generations, a cautionary tale about the cost of pride, a love story about second chances, a testament to the power of forgiveness and the strength of those who survive. But for those who lived it, it was simply their life. Complicated, beautiful, painful, and real. And when Helga lay dying, decades later, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, Magnus holding her weathered hand in his, she looked back on her life and felt only gratitude. For the pain that had taught her strength, for the rejection that had forced her to find herself, for the second chance that had allowed her to experience true love. "No regrets?" Magnus asked, his own eyes dim with age but still so familiar. "Only one," Helga said, her voice soft. "That it took us so long to find our way back to each other." "But we did find it," Magnus said, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "And that's what matters." Helga smiled, her eyes closing for the final time. "Yes," she whispered. "We found it, and it was worth everything." She slipped away peacefully, surrounded by love, her final breath a sigh of contentment. And Magnus, who had lived with the guilt of that rejection for decades, finally let it go. She had forgiven him, truly and completely, and in that forgiveness, they had both found freedom. The pack mourned their Luna, the rogues of the wildlands howled their grief, and Arvid stood at his mother's grave with tears streaming down his face. But beneath the sorrow was gratitude, for she had lived fully, loved deeply, and left a legacy that would endure for generations. The White Wolf Prince became the next Alpha King, ruling with the strength of his father and the compassion of his mother. And he taught his own children the story of their grandmother, of how she had been broken and rejected, but had risen from the ashes stronger than before. Remember, he would tell them, that strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up, about choosing to survive, to heal, to forgive. That's the legacy your grandmother left us. That's the lesson we must never forget. And so the story lived on, a beacon of hope for every broken heart, every rejected soul, every wolf who felt unworthy. It whispered that second chances were possible, that forgiveness could heal even the deepest wounds, that love, real love, was worth fighting for. The sun set over the silver moon territory, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, just as it had all those years ago. But this time, there was no rejection, no cruelty, no breaking of bonds. There was only peace and love, and the quiet certainty that some stories, no matter how painful their beginning, can have beautiful endings. If only we're brave enough to fight for them. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this beautiful love story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.